All right. So, a couple things as we get started here. Uh, Basically, I've been like crazy sick this week, so things are moving a little bit slower for me. Don't have the Rona, but it's been like I've just been just a wicked cold, which colds don't usually get me. Like I don't usually get colds very often, but it kind of spooked me because that means if I could get a cold, I could get Rona, and which means, but I've been pretty good about. I'm really good about trying to distance and all that stuff. But for whatever reason, this one got me, and so I've been just a little bit dragging. I've had to be pretty hopped up on a bunch of uh, like Dayquil and Nyquils to get me going, to keep me alive here a little bit. So, but it does slow me down a little bit. So the deal is, originally the plan was to do we did lesson 5 last time of WISE, and I was going to do an intermediate lesson 6, and then we were going to do lesson 7 today. But it just got dragged down. So what we're going to do is I did lesson 5 on Monday. We're going to do lesson 6 today, and then I'm going to do lesson 7 as a video after this one. I'm gonna post that one after today. And as a result, I'm gonna make the 5, 6, and 7 wise thing due on Friday night instead of tonight. Billy's like stoked on that one. So I saw a couple people have already gotten who's got their stuff in already for the 5, 6, and 7. Cool.
I've
Uh,
done 5 and 6. I'm working on 7 right now.
okay. So you guys are probably a little bit ahead of the game. Austin, you're way ahead of the game. That's cool. So hopefully, what you'll do is you'll see this again, and I don't feel bad about that because the truth is you need to see this stuff over and over and over for it to sink in. Just going through for this one time, it just like, I mean, if you're anything like me, but I mean, I've done this thing quite a few times now, and it's still just now starting to sink in. It's so
Yeah,
you're just
I
because,
mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I had to do section 7 like 3 or 4 times to be able to pass it.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it
yeah,
would
that's a tough
be
one.
as much as we can go over it, the better for me, honestly, even though it's done.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. And it's not until, it's like, I mean, I imagine like, think about it like this. This is what it feels like for our AP1 students who are learning Pro Tools. Or, like it's when you're learning a new DAW or something like that. Like you just don't know all the things that it can do, and it's really hard to understand like what it's hard to look at. It's when you're working with Pro Tools or whatever DAW you're working in, if it's um like Ableton or whatever your DAW choice is, that you're so fluid with it that you don't even think about all where the buttons are and how they work. That's awesome. That's where we want to get with this, but it's obviously very difficult. And I remember, like, I look at my parents, and my parents, I'm sure, are a lot older than your parents, but my parents, like, I fortunately my brother is an IT guy. Like, so when my parents have a computer question, they ask him, sucker. So like I have 3 younger brothers, and so like basically we're all very computer fluent. We're all very tech savvy. But because my brother, he runs like this multi-million-dollar IT consulting company thing for like Disney and the Department of Defense and all that kind of stuff. So my parents are like, how do I print something? We're like, Tim, you take this one, because like because they're like, you need to do that. But he is really good at it. But it's funny because like we quickly get frustrated with our parents when we see how, I don't know. Again, your parents are probably younger than mine, so mine are probably like barely even able to get on things like FaceTime and that kind of stuff. Like that's magic to them. It's the magic. Actually, FaceTime is still magic to me too. It's pretty cool. But it's hard for me to understand, and I was always really frustrated with them for years with like just like their uptake of technology. But it was like it wasn't until I started learning Linux that I felt like I'm like, oh my God, this is what it feels like for them when they're working with Windows, is when I'm working with Linux, like for the first time. And actually, this is the old version of Linux that are really cryptic and difficult. And I was like, oh, all I want to do is load a program. Like, oh my God, this is so hard. And that's what that feels like to them. Well, that's what it feels like now when we're working with this. What Wise is to us is what Pro Tools is to AP1 students. So it'll get there, but you have to go through this stuff over and over and over to get to the point where you can actually like put this stuff to work. So what we're gonna do, the plan of attack here is we're gonna go through, we're gonna get our certification by the end of this week. And if you, like I said, you don't actually have to pay for this certification, but if you want to do it, go for it. It's like $200, so it's not cheap. But it's up to you if you want to do it. The cool thing is, if you decide that you do want to get your certification, then you can take the 110 certification if you want to do that, and that's like a special star. That one doesn't cost you anything if you want to do that. But to do the 110 certification, you have to have the 101 certification, and I can proctor the 110 certification, so we can cross that bridge when we get to it if we want to. I'm sorry, I know I'm speaking really fast. The caffeine's starting to really kick in now. I feel good. So hang on tight. So what we're gonna do after this class, though, to try to set this content is we're gonna loop back through this again. And so we're not going to be meeting on Monday because Monday is Labor Day. So we have basically we won't meet until for another week for today. Austin, you know what that's called? That's called Fiero. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Like I've talked about it before in I think in critical listening, but I don't know who was in that class. But I read a game or like a video game theory book a few years ago, and they talk about this thing about like how like measuring success in like why we like video games, the psychology behind video games, and like we like losing like things like Tetris. Like why do we like playing Tetris? You know you're gonna lose. You can't beat the game, right? You're always going to lose. So you're just trying to get the high score. But when you get past a certain point, or whenever you're like if you're watching your favorite sports team or something like that, and you win, this is a natural human reaction to lift your hands up like a moment of elation. It's called fiero. That's the term that they attach to it. So you'll see it, and it's an innate human reaction of success. It's a weird thing that we always do this. We raise our hands up.
Have you watched the Netflix docuseries High Score?
I just started. I got through the first episode. I haven't watched
Oh,
anything
great. Yeah,
beyond that.
awesome. It gets really, really good.
Do they
So,
talk about that kind of stuff in there?
not necessarily that, but they pin a lot of cool things I think you might be interested in.
It probably stems from that book that I'm talking about because there's this neat book. It's like it was like 600 pages, but it was about like like just about the science of video games, like the psychology of video games and why we like to play them and how what we can learn. The thesis is what can we learn what beneficial things can we learn from video games and incorporate that into our real lives and how do we blend those two together and and it even addresses things like game addiction and some of that kind of stuff, which is kind of interesting. So anyhow, so the idea is that we're going to loop through this a couple times, and then we're going to when we get back next week we're going to dive into sound design, and we're going to take basically about a week about a sidestepping about sound design. And during that time when we're doing the lectures on and classes on sound design and Foley and session setup and that sort of stuff, what I want you to be doing is I want you to be going through this again. So we're gonna loop through this again, and your job, the project is to rebuild Cube using only your own sounds, and you can loop through the the lessons again if you need to, if you need a refresher. But the goal is to try to do this, approach this as if it were a game that you're working with a team, so that you can pretend you're like, okay, these are what I need to do. Granted, we already have a path, we already know what we're supposed to do with this game. That's fine. But there's some other objects we haven't explored, like the blend containers and some of these other things that would be good to try to experiment with and just to like poke around, because right now we're still just getting our feet underneath us with Wise, but there's so much more that it can do that we need to go further with. And we're gonna loop back around that, and we're gonna do the Wise 301 later in the semester when we do the Wise Unity integration. So that's just kind of a path of where we're going. But next week we're gonna be doing some more sound design stuff, which I think is gonna be really fun. Cool. Okay, let me do what is it? Hang on, I gotta do snippet tool. I gotta do attendance real quick. Cool. Let's see. This is class 6. Cool. All right. Let's do it. So what we're gonna do today is I need to wipe my session again here. Save the project. Sorry, I gotta set this up. I had to take the dog for a walk today, and I didn't get a chance to set this all up ahead of time. So what I'm doing is I'm resetting my thing, because I went through. The way I do this is I run through the session myself, take some notes, and then I wipe it so I can start it all over again, and get it back to default state. And okay, dang it. Sorry, I gotta close all this out. Take me 2 seconds here. All right, while that's doing it, I'll share my screen, and we're off to the races. Oh, hang on, I gotta stop share. I gotta enable the share computer sound. Cool. Okay. All right, let's do some Wise. So I said, like I said, I changed the due date back um to go back to whatever Friday night, but don't do this. Try and get it done before Friday night. Don't do this Friday at midnight. That sucked. So you don't have to do that. All right, lunch Wise. Yeah, I'll open other so you can see it. Lesson 6, project 6. Update it. All right. So what we want to work on now, where we left off, well, I guess where we want to step into now is this notion of starting to mix our session. So at this point, and it's going to be kind of a blurred thing in the same way that when you're writing a song or composing a song, we're oftentimes mixing while we actually create the tune. But usually at some point we say, okay, I've got enough of my elements in there. I've got enough of my editing done. I got enough of my like logistical setup ready to go, so that we move into essentially the mixing phase. And this is going to come later in the project. Granted, you'd probably be pre-mixing ahead of time, but for me in music production, I really like to spend the time defining that you have your recording and editing. So basically for me, it's recording, editing, mixing, mastering. And I try to just do those as 4 discrete events, not for necessarily my own projects, but when I'm working with other clients type stuff. So, and the idea is that when you get out of, when you're done mixing or recording or bringing in sounds and getting arranging the song, then you're going to go into editing. And editing is if you're recording raw stuff, that's where you need to do a lot of editing, like drum editing, vocal editing, that sort of stuff. But if you're doing like electronic music and you're not gonna, like, editing is still there, but it's a different done in a different fashion. And then you move into mixing. And I'm a firm believer, like, basically what one of the things, like, if you send your stuff to say Chris Lord Algae to mix your records, you have to basically bounce everything down into flat tracks, and so that when you mix, you can't do any editing. So because I think a lot of us probably, when we're in the mixing phase, you'll hear some edit that you're like, oh, I gotta go back and I gotta change that, and then you go in that, and so you're trying to wear 2 hats with your editing hat and your mixing hat at the same time, where you're hearing stuff, and it's when you get to mixing, it's difficult, especially if it's your own project that you've been working on for a long time, to separate yourself and be objective and listen to it with just objective ears and listen to the mix, not to the editing and not to the arrangement. That's a very difficult thing to do, but it's a very beneficial thing to do, where you can focus on just the mixing. And so this is kind of the stage that we're looking at right now. At this point, when you get to the point where you've got all your sounds in there and you've got all of your like everything, all your complexity stuff, like your sequence containers and your random containers and your blend containers and all those different kind of containers set up, so that they're all arranged exactly how you want them for the most part. And then it's time to move into, like, how does this thing sound with the project, or with the actual video game in itself. And so we can start to blend and we start to mix this thing. In real life, you're actually going to be blending these things together. You're going to be editing. You're going to be mixing at the same time, kind of. But you try to spend the time with just the mixing ears and go, okay, I want to focus on just mixing at this time. And one of the challenges with this is when we're looking at these sounds right here. So if we've got all of our sounds, whatever, let's, like, if we've got our ice ball container. Let's go back to 5. Let's get back to my normal stuff here. So that's what ice ball is. Cool. So ice ball is a random container containing these two different ice ball sounds right here, and it's playing between those, and you listen to it. Okay. Cool. I like that. But maybe there's some other stuff in here that are the problem, or I guess the problem with this is that I have to click on it, press play, or I can use my space bar. It's so cartoony. Are you guys hearing the sound, by the way? Okay, cool. I want to see the so it's hard to tell, though, as the scene gets more complex. Generally, when we have a scene happening in a video game, it's not like linear media, where in linear media, when you're mixing, you're going to have your stuff set up and you're going to have your stems. If we talk about it in terms of, say, post-production. In post-production, you're going to have your music, you're going to have your dialogue, you're going to have your sound effects, and you're going to have your ambience. And so those are going to be essentially 4. And maybe if you want to separate Foley out, you could, but you could also fold Foley into sound effects, where you basically have 4 sub buses there. And so basically your entire mix, because in a film, you may have 100 100 tracks wide of actual audio coming into your main mix, and it's too complicated for you to actually mix all those tracks at the same time. And in real life, you actually have 4 different engineers for each of those different roles sitting. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen a dubbing stage, but a dubbing stage for a film, it's like the console is the width of the entire auditorium, because this is the old version, the old way of doing it. But because you have 4 engineers there, you have, or 5, you have one doing music, one doing sound effects, one doing dialogue, one doing ambience, and then you have one doing that's kind of pulling it all together and submixing all those together. The thing is, when you get, and the same thing happens in games. In games, you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of sounds happening in your scenes or in your levels. But unlike linear media, where you can sit there and you can loop through until you get that thing tweaked and the mix just right so that it flows with the scene. Nonlinear media, you don't know what's going to happen. It could be that you're going to walk into a room with 1,000 monsters, or you could walk into a field where there's just a butterfly and some crickets chirping, but so you have to have your music adjust the same way, you have to have your footsteps adjust the same way, and your dialogue all in there. So it's difficult for us to hear all the things that are going to be happening because there is no press play and mix the scene. So what we need to do is we need to come up with a method so that we can actually launch these things and hear how they're going to sound in context relative to one another. Because for me, just to sit there and I could do like Death Rhino, that was the same every single time. Death Knight. Sounds like Death Hero or Death Player. That's the same one. It could be using the same one. Here's Death Player. It's a little bit different. What we want to do is come up with the system. So there's a couple different ways we can do this. So the first one we're going to look at is what's called the Soundcaster system here. So the Soundcaster is essentially like a clip launcher. It's kind of like a sampler. It's where we can line stuff up and we can listen to stuff a lot of things at the same time very quickly. So I don't have to be like clicking around here and hitting the space bar. So we want to set up this thing as it's called the Soundcaster session. So what I did there is Shift S, or I believe you can go under views, editors, Soundcaster in there. Can't remember what that, like, I always just use Shift S, so I don't know where it actually is in the menu system here. I don't know. I'll just do it here. So basically it's just Shift S is to get to your Soundcaster session. I'm sure it's in one of the menus there, but I don't know where it is. And what we want to do is we want to drag some sounds into here. So we're going to call this one, so we want to create a Soundcaster session. You can create a lot of these different things, a lot of as many Soundcaster sessions as you want as they relate to your scene or your game. So I'm going to create a new Soundcaster session right here. I'll call this one player. And now we have essentially a sampler right here. So I'm going to grab in and I'm following what they tell us to do. I'm going to do death player. I'll drag that one in here, and let's do foot player in here. So when you're like right now, this event list is getting a little bit large right here. It's pretty large. You can search for it if you want to. If I want to find out where it is, I can do foot player. Cool, that's the one I want. Clear that out. The other thing that's kind of cool here is you can say filter show all. You can filter by things like play events, stop events, and some of these other events. So like in this case, if I want to look at stop events, this end rocket monster and end rocket player, those are stop events, and I can look at all the play events, which are most of the other ones. Most of these are going to be play events, but you can filter if you're trying to find a specific thing. Show all. You can look at that. Okay. So now what we've got here is essentially it's a sampler, so I can play here. So I can now without having like as your list gets bigger and bigger and bigger over here, it gets more complicated, and for you to be clicking around in there is kind of clunky. Whereas now I can set these up and set up all the events that I want to in this particular space that are going to keep it confined. So this one I can say just like player moves. Right now it's going to be pretty basic, and we can see right now that I also have the ability to, like, when I drag this one in. So if I get rid of this one right here, let's get rid of it for a moment. That went away. My switches went away right here. But if I bring that one back in, foot player, we'll see that the switches thing comes alive here. That means that this is actually, I can switch to grass if I want to now. Gravel, which is the same as grass. That one's tile, but we actually called it metal back then in stone. Same difference. So we can see that we can have our switch states right here. I hit reset all. It's going to go back to its default concrete. We can also turn on all of them. We can see that, okay, well, we also have foot left and right. So as a switch container that we're not using, but this one's not using that, so we don't have to worry about that. Same thing on these like RTPCs. So I can hit show all, and it shows us our parameters that exist in the game, but adjusting these won't affect any of this stuff right here. So this is a useful tool where we want to go, okay, it's only going to show us the stuff that we actually care about. Triggers are more for music. States, we've seen that player life where we built that one before, Alive and Dead. Player in water. So if you want to do player in water, you say yes, and we could create a state change where basically we high pass filter everything to make it like you're underwater and make it quieter. Has quad as the gun. So, but we're not using those right now. Sorry, something's flashing over here. So let's drag, let's create another one. Let's do something that's a little more, let's do another one called here. It's called Rocket. And what we want to do is we want to grab, let's see, let's grab Fire Rocket Player. I have to look at my list here. Fire Rocket Player as an event. End Rocket Player. And hit Rocket Player. Okay, so if I want to do this, like let's do switch those order. So you can just click and drag these around, whatever makes sense for you. So what we've done here is these are event triggers. And if you look at this, we have the ability to have volume, pitch, and low pass filter. We can control those here. If I were to drag in some other events, well, let's actually drag in some other rocket events. Let's drag in some of all this rocket stuff right here. And we see that in these ones right here, we have the ability to change the volume, pitch, and low pass filter as kind of general settings right here. These ones aren't allowed to do that. And that's because if I just go back to my normal F5, I'm gonna move my Soundcaster out of the way for a minute here. And if I go to my just normal F5 view, which here are my general settings. So if I look at, say, explode, these are all the settings. This is the kind of the general settings right here that I have the ability to control. But when I go to an event down here, events don't have those controls. So they don't show up here, as I don't have the ability to change the volume, the pitch, low pass filter, and so on. Whereas this one, I can adjust it. And this one right here, what's that symbol right there? Does anybody remember what that symbol is right there? Hit me, what do you got?
Isn't that the actor mixer?
It is, it's the actor mixer. So the actor mixer, if we look at it, it can't play anything because the actor mixers don't actually, they're just a parent. They're a parent container for all these sound effects objects right here. So these are actually sound effects objects from the symbol right there. Explode is a random container that has sound effects in it. So these ones I can play, but this one I cannot play because there's nothing to play. It's just a parent container actor mixer for these ones right here. So if we look at this, let's do a launch, thrust, and explode. This is kind of the hierarchy. So if I want to do, I can say launch. So now this is a way that I can start to go, okay, so I know if I hit launch, explode. Still a little clunky, but I can at least start to hear how those blend together. And so I go, okay, I can bring up the gain. If I think this one's a little too loud, I can bring this one down if I need to. I can change it there, or I can go back over and change it in this here. So if I change, like, what am I on? Explode. If I bring explode down right here, you can see that it's changing also over here. So, and vice versa. So I'm gonna go back to 0 here for now. Cool. And of course it keeps the color coding, which is really quite useful. Cool. Let's see. So this one, we don't have any state changes or any kind of switches or RTPCs for this one right here. Okay. So that is what we call a Soundcaster session. And so you can create as many Soundcaster sessions as you want. that allow you to group stuff together. If you want to get to this, if I close this out and you want to get to where those Soundcaster sessions are, we look over sessions, and we got a sessions tab right here. And in the sessions tab, we have Soundcaster sessions. So you can see those two. I have Player and Rocket right now. So I can just double click on this and bring it up. So your list can get massive over here and create a ton of different Soundcaster sessions as you're developing your mix. So maybe you want to like blend all of your elements of your weapons together, all your dialogue together, and then also create ones where you're blending your, say, footsteps relative to your dialogue, and creating sessions for all of those. So cool. So that's where your sessions are. In fact, we're going to be looking at all of these. This is kind of the sessions tab is where we're spending most, actually our whole day today. So let's do this. Let's go create a mixing desk. So under our, if we want to take this a step further, we want to start mixing our thing. We see that we have under layouts, we have mixer or F8. So what I try to do, and I mentioned this before, even in other classes, like with all DAWs or all systems, shortcuts are the key to moving quickly here. And rather than going to your pull down menus, which is really clunky, just note what it is. It's F8, click off of it, then hit F8, and it'll go to it there. So now what it did is it created, this is what we call a mixing session right here. So I want to create a new mixing session. And what do I want to call this one? We'll call this one called Rocket, because we want to spend some time on working on rocket sounds. And if we kind of scroll down here and hide this, scroll up and down, we start to see what looks more like a traditional mixing session. We don't have any faders in here yet. And this is also a little bit different than what we would think about in terms of linear mixing, is that we create separate mixers for every single situation that we want. There is no one single master mixer for this whole session. It's basically, it's a combination. Your mixer is just all the relative volumes of all this going up into our master mixer hierarchy in here. So the mixer is just kind of built into the background, but what we want to do is we want to create a mixer session, so we create different windows for specific mixing scenarios. So in this case, we want to add those rocket events back in there. So I'm going to add those same rocket events that we had added down here. So, and actually what we have at the bottom is our Soundcaster session. So we like have a Soundcaster session and a mixing desk up here. So I'm going to go back to Rocket, and I want to grab all of these events right here and drag those into our mixing session up above. I think that's what I wanted to add. Yeah. So let's go to audio and let's grab all of these and drag those in. Now it looks a lot like a traditional DAW. We scroll from top to bottom. That these are we actually now have faders, like exactly as we would see this, and we have makeup gain. But some of the stuff we have like effects right here, and that's something we've seen fairly normal, and our aux sends right here. But then we have a lot of these, like low pass filter is ducking and some of this other stuff, and we have meters right here. Now the reason we don't have meters in any of these tracks right now is because these ones don't actually have, like, it's weird to think about it. It goes back to what we talked about last time, but the audio doesn't actually pass through this thing. It's not summed here. So it's only till it's actually summed at the buses here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these two. Actually, let's drag these two onto here. And now, doesn't matter which order they're in, but I like to have my master fader all the way on the right. So this is our master fader all the way over here on the right. You can see that this one does have a meter. This is the only place with all of this signal chain where these are actually summed together. So if we remember that this goes through, like if we look at where this is sending, so this is going, like if I just select on explode. So explode is sending to the parent, which is, well, it's going to rocket launcher. Rocket launcher is going to going to weapons. Weapons is going through sound effects, which is up here. Sound effects is going through environmental, then which is passing all the way up to master audio bus. So that's the kind of the path, but you can think about it as like the audio passing through theirs, but it's not. These are just each one of these is just a controller for this sound right here. It's not until it gets to the master audio bus that it's actually summed, and it's a weird concept to think about, but that's what's happening. And what the reason I believe for this is that it's doing a whole lot less math. for the system. When you work with a digital mixer and if you sub bus two channels together to sum them into a single channel, it actually does the mathematical summation of digital summation with that. If you're in analog, it's super easy to do with analog, but in digital, it has to do that math. And then every time you sum those together, it has to sum that all in math, and that's very complicated. And so what we don't want to do is have all this math of summing these all together where we could just do it in one final step. So what these do is those create the offsets that tell it what to do for the final step right there. I believe that's the case. I'm not entirely sure on that one right there. Now, what we can do is what did I want to hit on here? So if I press play, we can see, like, if we want to do launch, we'll see above launch plays. Not very exciting. We don't see a lot of action happening right there. We see like explode. We see our meters. Of course, like in anything, it's a good idea to keep your eye on the meters, make sure that you're not overloading anything. But we're not getting the whole picture here. To actually see a little bit more information, we need to, we can turn on, start capturing. The capture is basically, I don't know why it does this. This is something that's a little confusing to me, why we do that. But now when I hit the capture, if I hit, you'll see these light up. That means they have signal on them. And so what we can tell that it went to, actually, the rocket launcher should probably go this way. I like to think of my buses this way. It's apparent. This is just an actor mixer right there, but we can imagine that it goes to explored, to rocket launcher, to environmental, to master audio bus. We skipped a couple things in there because there's also weapons, and I mean we could put the weapons one in there if we wanted to, but we can start to see what happens here, and we can see that the thrust has pitched down 1200 hertz or 1200 cents, but now we can see a little bit more information. This one is pretty interesting right here. Is this duct? So there's a picture of a duck, and so you can see when things are ducking. If you recall, last time we set up the ducking so that we can set it up so that when the music is playing, well, actually, let's just do this as an example real quick. I'm going to drag in my music right now. Actually, I'm going to do this in the other one. We'll do this we'll create a separate, let's remove that one. We'll create a separate mixer and do that in another one. Let's do this. Let's create a separate mixer. One of the things you might want to do, let me make sure I hit everything I wanted to. Yeah. Let's create another one we call master buses. I'm just going to call it, well, I could call it master buses. So in this case, I want to drag in all of these. So this would be kind of like a master mixer. So like if I want to get an overview of what the whole session is happening, I could drag in all of my master buses. And we only have a limited number of sub busing going on right here. As your game would get bigger and bigger, you're going to create more different more specific sub aux sends kind of buses going on in there. So I'm going to drag the master audio bus over here. I'm going to go kind of like environmental and music that are together. Actually, I'm going to do this. Yeah, that would work. So we can see that ENV corridor, that's our reverb. If you recall from last time, our reverb is actually a summing bus. And so that's one where it's summed. So we will have a meter on our environmental corridor, and we have one on our master audio bus. These are sub buses to the parent right here. So they're not actually passing audio. They're just creating the offsets, and they're controlling the offsets of these, but they're not actually passing the audio. They're controllers. So and it's a way for organizing our signal flow. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So if you recall last time, basically I'm going to do this. I'm going to get music playing. Just for example right now, I'm going to throw our music. The only thing that's passing through the music is going to be this main cube music thing. So I'm going to just drag that one down over here, just kind of as a off to the side thing, and so we can hear this one playing. So if I press play, I'm going to do capture. So when it's capturing, we can see that the music it's passing through the music bus right here and sending it up to the master bus. Now, if I were to, say, explode something, can you hear that? It's a little bit tricky to hear. Do you remember that ducking that we added there? So we can say is ducking right here. It says music. So when this happens, it ducks the music out of the way. So listen to see if you can hear the music go down. I think we had it drop by 6 dB or something like that. So if we go to game syncs, well, let's just listen for it first. Let's just see if you can hear it. See if you can hear the music duck away. You heard it come, you didn't necessarily hear it go away, but you heard it come back in. Did you hear that? Like it's after a second of this not playing that this will come back in. So, and you can actually watch the meters and see it happen too. So when that turns off, that means it pulls back up over 1 second, over a 1 second, 1 second time. So, so it gives you a little bit of information here, and this is really useful when you have a pretty large session. You're like, why am I not hearing it? Because as your scenes get more and more complex, you have to do a lot more like routing troubleshooting to figure out why you can't hear something. Like, where did that sound? Like, why can't I hear it? And this setting up a mixing session will allow you to kind of follow the signal through its path, going, why am I not hearing it? Where is it not coming from? And the little headphone things will give you a visual indicator of where that sound. You can also use Profiler. I think that I like using the Profiler a little bit better, but Mixer works just fine here. The other thing we can do is we can actually control stuff in here. So we see that it says editing states up here. Our editing states, if we go to environmental, if I double click on this, it pulls up basically our general settings window. This is the same window as if I were over in my general settings over here and just pull it up, but now it does it as a pop out. And you'll notice that there's a lot of times you can get to windows in different ways. Sometimes they're in the main window, sometimes there's going to be floating windows. And in fact, if you look under like our like editors right here, there's a whole bunch of editors along down here. We have profilers, we have utilities. These are all these different pop-out editors that kind of pop out here. Yeah, I guess you can create, I didn't know you can do different project explorers. That's kind of cool. I did not know that. So you can set up different project explorers over here. But what we want to do in this case is we want to set up states. So if we go over here and create states, this is the same thing we had done before, but I'm going to add a state group here. I'm going to add the player life, and it does this dead or alive one. We've seen this one before. So this is what we did when we died with the heartbeat. We would create it so that over time the bus volume, or the bus volume would decrease to go away, and then the high pass filter would increase, meaning it would sweep down the high pass filter. So we have the controls here, but we can also do that down here. And so when I did this now, when I created that state, you see that it shows up now here as the states in here as player life, alive, or dead. And so I'm going to choose alive, and nothing changes. But now I'm going to choose dead. And when I choose dead on my environment, what I'm going to do is this is because I attached, now this is my state change right here. I have my player life. I'm going to bring this one down. Let's do the bus volume. Let's do this as -8. And let's bring this one up to low pass filter up to -65, or up to 65. So if you recall, it's weird to think about it, but when the high pass filter number increases, the value, the filter is pulling down. It moves opposite. So it's weird to think about the low pass filter that way. It basically, when the number goes up, the filter sweeps down. It's just weird like that. And then this is -8. Now, part of you may be asking, you're like, well, wait a minute, we already set that up so that when the player dies, the heartbeat fades away and the music goes to when the player dies, the heartbeat fades away and the high pass filter increases. So basically the heartbeat fades away. But if you're in a game where you die and everything else is, you still have other characters, say it's like whatever, Quake or Unreal Tournament or something like that, where you basically, it's a first person shooter and you're waiting to respawn in, and maybe it takes like the penalty for dying is like a 15-second waiting to respawn. You have to sit there dead for a little while. Well, what you want to do is you want to give it the sound of something that's like a little bit more, you want to change the sound. So it's not like when you're dead laying on the ground, you see everybody's footsteps running by. You don't want it to be like full bandwidth. So what we did here is we made it so it's a little bit quieter, and there's also the high pass filter. So it's going to be a more muted sound. So when you're dead, everything is more muted. So that's what we're essentially enabling here. So when I go to alive, everything is full bandwidth. And when we die, any of the sound effects, so music, anything that right now we have it set up, anything that's going straight to the master audio bus, like the heartbeat. So remember, if you recall, the heartbeat goes straight to the master audio bus. But anything that goes like environmental corridor or sound effects that pass, or anything that goes directly through this environmental bus, gets turned down and also high pass filtered a bit to give it a different quality of sound. So that's what we're doing with there, is you have the ability to do these state changes right here, which is actually pretty useful. You could set that state change up in the other way we did it with the heartbeat if you wanted to before, but you can also set it up here. And so what we're trying to show is there's multiple ways to set up the same effect. If we set up, like if we brought in, let's just see if we brought in heartbeat. So it's under player, in character, heartbeat. So if I brought in heartbeat, you'll see that this is the play. It also has the player life here. So when I'm dead and when I'm alive. So dead, cool. Let's remove this one though. So you can set up as many mixers as you want to for every single situation, and also it's pretty huge. So if I want to turn RTPCs, you can shut stuff if you don't need them. I want to turn on properties though, so I can see the faders. Yeah, and you might want to drag this down. But now what's cool is you have a Soundcaster session and a mixing session together in the same setup here. And just like with the over here in the sessions, we have our mixing sessions right here. And so I have master buses, and then I have rocket. So I can pull it up there, or I could just get to it from here. So I have master buses and rocket, and I could, like this one, I have a player and rocket. So you probably likely would set up. You don't have to. Like if I was just mixing, I would pull. If I was just doing the master buses one, I would probably not really. Well, I might be using some. I would create up a Soundcaster master session where it would be things that you want to trigger, so you can blend like the music with the footsteps, with the dialogue, and weapon sounds, so they all kind of work together, and keep an eye on what's going on here. And so you can adjust your stuff as needed here. The other thing I want to point out real quick here is this idea we call follow states. So follow states means what we have the ability to do is it will follow the state of what's actually happening in the game. So basically what we're going to get to here in a couple minutes is you can actually play the game and mix it live at the same time. And so when you have follow states, what it's going to do is it's going to follow the state what the game tells it to do. With this selected, it's not going to allow, it's going to ignore any of the states coming from the game. But if we do push states, we can push the state to the game. So maybe there's like some musical event that needs to happen, and it doesn't happen until the very end of the scene, or you have to collect like 100 coins or something like that. You like if you're gameplay testing, you don't want to go through and collect 100 coins every single freaking time. It's such a pain in the butt. You can push states, and you can tell the game the state that you want to have happening at that given time. So that's the difference between pushing these follow states. I haven't really spent much time with that, so I'm a little fuzzy on that one. I know in theory how that works, but I haven't really, like I said, I haven't really spent any time with that. So that one's a little weird to me. Okay, but this is all well and fine, but it's still one of these things that's a little annoying, is that I'm still mousing around and I'm pushing buttons. Sorry, I got to keep an eye on the clock here. What are we doing? Oh yeah, we're doing good. So the challenge here though is that it's a clunky interface working with a mouse to trigger stuff. So there's going to be things where you want to trigger stuff at the same time to see how they work together. Like in the case of this one, when I do the rocket launch and thrust. So the order of events, like if we look at, let's see where the rocket stuff. So the events that are triggered from the game are going to be fire rocket player, hit rocket player, and rocket player. So fire rocket player. Let's go deconstruct that one a little bit. I'm going to go back to my F5. Go back to my original one, and let's do fire rocket player for my events right here. We can see what it does is in fire rocket player, it triggers both our launch and thrust at the same time. And if we go back to our basically our mixing session right here, I could also do a Soundcaster session, but I think, like, I don't know, I feel like working the Soundcaster session here works. So when I hit this one right here, what it's doing is it's triggering this one and this one at the same time. And then when it gets to hit rocket player, let's do what hit rocket player triggers. Hit rocket player, let's see what they're doing. Hit rocket player just does explode. But also, then also there's the end rocket player. So end rocket player, this is an interesting one. End rocket player, what end rocket player does is it stops the thrust. So it's a stop event. So end rocket player is just a stop event. It's not a play event. So what's happening there is, it's going, when I hit this one triggers this one and this one to start. Hit rocket player does explode, and this one turns off thrust. So basically, Yeah, that sounds about right. So the problem with that one is though, even if I have this set up right here, and to me it seems weird. It seems like Hit Rocket Player, you could just add an end event for explode, or you could add a thrust end event for this one right here. So what they're doing is the game calls are coming for the events are going to be to fire Rocket Player to hit, and then they also have to tell it to end. So that's coming from the game to tell it to stop playing the thrust event. Which I don't know. I think to me, I would just say I would roll that into here, but whatever. This is how they have it set up. So, but it's still a little weird because I have to hit fire Rocket Player and then I have to hit Rocket Player and end Rocket Player at the same time, and that's very difficult to do with a mouse. I'm okay at it, but that gives you at least a kind of a clue how it's going to sound in the game. So I can go through, and if I feel like the explosion was too big, let's go back to Rocket over here. Let's turn up. Let's make the explosion a little bit bigger. So you can adjust that if I want to pitch it down a little bit, maybe. Let's pitch this down just a touch. Sorry. Got some stuff stuck. I got a tickle in my throat. So we get our mix kind of set up that way. But we know it'd be a whole lot easier and cooler is if we could actually mix like we were used to doing in the studio. So we can actually hook up controllers and MIDI controllers to this. So one of the things I've got ridiculous amounts of controllers. Part of it is because that's like the research that I love doing is human interaction with music devices. So for today, I'm going to use. I've got a sorry, I've got a MIDI fighter twister and a MIDI fighter, just a MIDI fighter. So these two are really useful for this kind of work. And I'll show you kind of how I want to set these things up. So what I want to do is I'm going to start off with my MIDI fighter twister. So the twister, does anybody have one of these or ever played with them? Yeah. Austin, do you have one or do you own it?
I don't have one, but my buddy of mine has one that I think he basically made it himself.
Yeah.
Like custom built it himself. And Kevin Rouser
Yep.
has one.
Cool.
And yeah, I think it's pretty fun to play with, especially for like Max for Live stuff.
Yeah. So this one is really neat. This is the twister. So what it is, it's 16 knobs that can be, they're just MIDI controlled. Right here, you can't see it, but basically they're infinitely controlled. They're infinite dials here. And then on the side, I have 4 pages of them that change different colors. You can program the colors in to be whatever you want. So it's essentially, 16 times 4 different knobs that I have to work with right there by moving back and forth different pages. And also every one of them is also a button. So you can push on it and twist it. So there's some shift buttons on the side here. It's just freaking cool. You can do so much and also it's really, I don't know, it just feels good in your hand. The rubber on it's just badass. So this is a really useful tool for mixing for this. I mean, you can actually set up as a fader system, and I've got some fader controllers but I like this one because it's a software controller. So that it has it's not a knob, it's not a physical knob. If I had one that had a physical knob, I'd want one that has motorized control. Because the problem, well, you'll see in a second here, that if I don't have the motorized control, this one's actually really useful for setting us up for doing. It's hard to show it, but because also the reason this one's called the MIDI Fighter 3D because it actually has accelerometer in it, so you can pick it up and it encodes it. So go, wow, I can use it for like filter sweeps and stuff if I want to actually pick it up and hold it. But MIDI Fighter got famous because they're essentially video game buttons, but they're really fast tactile. So you can actually drum really quick with these things. They don't have velocity control. That bums me out. I like it when I have velocity control, but they're extremely responsive. And same thing with this one. It has shift keys on the sides, and it has 4 different. This one has 4 different pages along the top here. So I'm going to choose mine as blue. We'll stick with the blue one. Well, again, it changes color when I pick it up and roll it around, but when I hold it flat, it's blue. That's my blue page. I set these up for the minor scale, so I can actually play music with these ones when it's on set.
And the Ableton conference happened at Cervantes, and Lauren was there, teaching people as well. I was able to set up a lesson with Mr. Bill, a private lesson. Nice. And I went to his studio, which is out in the middle of bum nothing.
Yeah.
And he has one of those, and he was like raving about it, and like I almost bit the bullet and bought one, but I wasn't able to like ditch the money quite yet. So I'm looking forward to getting one soon. The buttons just feel so great. You feel like you're playing Pac-Man, but
Yeah.
the accelerometer thing is really really cool. And he was showing me some cool stuff that like Ilesh was doing with it, and she does a lot of like the Emojin heap style, like production style. So like you having the accelerometer and like a device like that is really useful.
It is
And
neat. I wish they don't have it in
really
the
cool.
Twister, which I'm bummed. I wish it was in the Twister, but
Yeah,
they only have it in it's called the MIDI Fighter 3D, and it's like what, $200 or something like that.
yeah,
The way I get my gear is I always roll these into like grants and stuff like that. So I did this installation last February
right.
where basically I wanted to give. So what I do is I set these out in the dome and I let people come and play on these. And the cool thing about these things are bomb proof. They're meant to be used outside. They're not waterproof, but they're water resistant. So if you get rained
Mhm.
on, you're okay. Like these things are bomber.
And
And
the big thing
so
is dust proof.
yeah. So, and also kid proof. So what I
Yeah.
set these out is I set them out in the middle and I let people push buttons on it so they trigger stuff. And like what I didn't know is they were going to bring a bunch of 5-year-olds through the thing, and so the 5-year-olds are sitting there playing on this thing and they're hitting it as hard as they can with their fists and stuff like that. And I'm like, ah! But the cool thing was I got to roll that into the budget, the build budget. So I got to buy both these as part of that whole thing. So I don't use them for my own production. Haven't been writing much these days, but I don't use them for much of my own production. But I want to because I have a push too. I think I still prefer the feel of a push two. I think push two is just badass, but. Um, so yeah, but these things are dope for this sort of thing. So yeah, the push wouldn't really work for this sort of situation, but I've got a bunch of other things. So what I want to do is I want to set up my MIDI fighter key buttons to trigger these things like here, down here, and I want to set up my twister to control my knobs and stuff up here, and to control all of this business up here. So to do that, if we look over here, we see we have our soundcaster sessions, we have our mixing sessions. Now we want to do a control surface session. So the control surface session, if you happen to have a MIDI controller of any kind, anything will work. You can also use pianos. You can use whatever you've got. Like the one that they demonstrate in the book is the little nano control, which I've got. I've got one of those too. Actually, it's pretty cool. But there's issues with those ones. I'll get into that later. But if we look at this right here, so we have a new control surface session right here. So I can just double click on this one if I want to pull it up. But the first thing we need to do before we need to do this, we need to set up our MIDI hardware. So it's under project, and we have our control surface devices. So you only have to do this one time, and I'm going to go through. I'm going to delete the ones I've got because I already have them in here from before. So this is what it looks like when you open it up for the first time. You have your control surface devices with nothing. I'm going to hit add. I'm going to call it, let's just call it Twister. And MIDI device, it's a MIDI device right here. So we have two different things. We have Mackie control and MIDI device. So Mackie control, if you happen to have like a mixer, like a Behringer mixing device, or even the old Mackie stuff, Mackie makes the Huey protocol, and it's more for doing stuff like, well, you can do fader controls with it, but it's also for transport control and that sort of stuff. So some devices that some hardware devices that you buy, they speak Huey. It's basically MIDI, but it's a specific kind of MIDI. Most of what we do with is going to be MIDI devices here. I want this to receive from, and then this is going to be from, this is what it shows that I've got. So I can come from other stuff like Touch OSC. So if you want to create a Touch OSC, you can actually control it from your phone if you want to do this. If you've not used OSC, it's a different kind of, it's a protocol for talking between devices. It's kind of like MIDI, but it's different. Then on my Motu device here, so if I just have I can listen on Motu right there if I wanted to. But I'm gonna do Twister here, and this is what's cool because I have a well here. Let me go grab my other device real quick. Let me grab it so I can show you what I'm talking about. So I've got my nano control here, my Korg nano control, and um, sorry, you need headphones. Can't hear what's going on. So the Korg Nano Control here. So the Korg Nano Control, it's physical ups and downs. It's got physical knobs that turn twist here. The problem is when I select on a track, it's not these don't move. So in other words, if I select on a track and the fader on the computer is at unity, but this fader is all the way down, and I switch to that, if I move this thing, it's going to hop to whatever this one is. And so the problem is that this one doesn't respond. It's a one-way communication protocol. If you're using something that has that has knobs that are like rotary encoders or sliders right here, it's a one-way ticket right there. So in other words, it's I don't like this style as much. It works, but the problem is your
Is it
mixes
touch
get a little
sensitive?
funky. This is not touch sensitive, no.
Gotcha.
So it's only when I move it that it actually will respond to it, which is kind of annoying. So it does have this ability though. There's like does this one have it? No, this one doesn't have this. Some of them have like on the nano, like if you look at some of the Novations hardware, if you pick up a Novation piece of hardware like that, or even some of the Kai stuff does this too. There's usually a button that says send all, and it basically will send all of the values from this as MIDI as MIDI in things. What that will do is that'll sync whatever your software session is, whether be it Wise or Ableton or whatever you're using. It'll send all of those MIDI values of the current state of all of these out at once, so that it syncs your software to your hardware. But again, this is kind of a bummer. And I do think this is a nice little device. I use this for some things. Like when I go to when I'm doing an installation, I'll just set this up, and I'll set this up as my master fader right here. And so it never changes. So this will always be my master fader, and it never changes from a master fader. And that will work actually pretty fine. And we can set our session up to do that here too as well. So I'm not going to set that one up. But the reason that's why I like the Twister so much is that it's a two-way communication. So in other words, this one, if I chose that hardware device, I would not put send to, but this one I want to send back to the MIDI Fighter Twister. So that means when I select on a track, it's going to send the information up to the MIDI Fighter or to the Twister and sync whatever I have up here. So that's really useful. So I'm going to set that one. Let's set up the MIDI Fighter. And it's going to be MIDI Fighter 3D, MIDI Fighter 3D. This one doesn't really respond. The MIDI Fighter doesn't respond to MIDI, so I guess I don't really need to do this one. But if you have a device where you want it to be like it changes color, I wish I could change it so that when I push this one, it changes the color of it when it's on or active, and then off when it's off. But it doesn't really work like that. I won't say it's a dumb device, but it's a one-way device. It doesn't receive MIDI. Cool. So now I have my MIDI devices set up in my session here. And what we want to do now is we want to start assigning values to this. So let's go to this new control surf session. I can rename this thing if I want to. We'll just call this one Rocket for now too. Well, we'll call this just general. So we have two different options here. When this thing shows up initially, it does this binding. It creates a default binding right here. And we have two different values here. So global and current selection. So current selection means I want you to control whichever track I'm selected on. So like in this case, or like whatever, like in this case, I'm on our launch, or whatever object I'm selected on. It could be also over here. It could be on jump. So right now, if I pass this through on jump, let's see if that works. Oh, so this one works right here. So it says pass MIDI note. So these two values, and this gets a little deeper into MIDI theory, but if these aren't actually putting out MIDI notes, they're putting out CC controls. Does anybody know what the difference between a MIDI and a MIDI note and a CC is? Curious. So it's just one of those things that I spend a lot of time in Macs, and I deconstruct MIDI messages a lot, and I reconstruct them. There's different MIDI values that get sent out, and in this case, a CC value is a control value. It's like MIDI note or MIDI controller 128, whereas MIDI notes are 144 values. It's more than I want to get into right now, but basically these don't actually put out MIDI notes. Oh, this one does. Cool. So this one is actually putting out a MIDI note. This one is putting out CC values. This one's putting out a MIDI note. So now what it will say, it'll pass any MIDI note that I have to current selection. So right now I'm on I was on jump. Let's do footsteps. So now I can play the MIDI, I can play the footsteps right there. I don't really like this one right here. I'm gonna get rid of this. I don't think it's cool. It's confusing to me. So what I'm going to do is now work on current selection, and here's the trick with this thing. You have to say add, learn, and learn binding. What I'm going to do is let's do volume control. Let's set this up. So I want to say add, learn, and binding. So it's listening for the learn. So now just like in Ableton kind of stuff, I'm going to move my bottom left knob in the blue on my blue window. So I turn my knob. It's channel 1 CC value 12. Cool. and I can turn off learn. And what I want that to do is I want to do object. These are the things I can control with this thing. I can control object commands like solo, stop, play, inspect, rename, all this kind of thing. We can do that, but I'm gonna do object properties. So this is a whole bunch of stuff. These are all the properties that are objects, and not all objects have all of these properties, but these are all the things that you can control. It pulls this out for us normally here, and I'm just gonna do voice volume. Voice volume is gonna be kind of your common one that you'd want to do. So I say voice volume. Cool. So I move this out of the way, and I select on, say, pain. Let's trigger some pain. Actually, yeah. Let's I should have got. I'm gonna add that one binding back just to keep it simple for right now. Let's just add a let's just add this one here. MIDI Fighter CC. And what I want to do is I want to have it, oh, it's not that one. Clear controller assignment. I'm going to add and learn. I want to do pass MIDI notes. Okay. So right now I'm on let's go back over to, yeah, let's do footsteps. So I'm pushing on my MIDI Fighter footsteps. You can see my voice volume changing up here, but if I also go to my footsteps, I don't have if I just go to my general settings right here. So now I have control over this one right here, which is really useful. So okay, let's also going up the channel strip on my MIDI Fighter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this one as this one is going to be voice volume. I'll do this one as low pass filter. This one as pitch. So let's do that. Let's go over back to my, where did my window go? Sessions. I want to learn. Let's go to this one. Add and learn binding. Pick the one above it. I want this one to be object properties. Let's do this as, we'll do the next one as pitch, sure. And then we'll do add and learn binding, one above that one. I want that one to be, let's do low pass filter. And I guess I could even go far. Let's just, might as well do one more just since we're here. Let's do high pass filter on this one. Cool. Now, if I'm pressing play, let's move this out of the way a little bit. So what that allows me to do is while I'm moving around, and it depends on whatever I'm touching. So now if I'm on, let's go back to my audio. I'm on footsteps right there. I could also go down to, like, I could trigger one of these down here. These ones don't respond to MIDI notes down here, which is kind of annoying. Your event plays don't. But if I do, let's do dot. So you can go through and quickly select on your events and adjust them the way you like them. You can also, which is cool, is when we're in the mixer, and when we're in our mixer settings here, we can I can adjust my mixer setting right there. So this is what's cool, is like as soon as I like, oh, this one's not sending out the MIDI, which is weird. Yeah, so it's hopping. It's not sending out the MIDI. It's not doing the two-way communication right now. That's wrong. But
Is it because on your output you have it set to the Motu instead of back to the?
is that what I did? Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I'm like, that's weird. Something's wrong with there. There we go. Thank you. So now when I switch over to this one, it starts where it left off. And it's hard to see. It's like maybe you can see it here. But this is on the, so I'm on environmental right now on the bottom one. If I switch over to this one, you can see it drop down on this one, which is really, that is clutch. I think that that's the advantage of the device like this, is that it hops to, so it doesn't like create this like jump, like as you saw I was doing a second ago. Good eye, Sean. I didn't see that. So you can go through and you can create these multiple setups. But one of the things that may be the case is that you're like, well, what's annoying is like I hate having to switch to select the object every single time. Where are we at in time? Okay, we're good here. So what I can do here is instead in my control surface right here, bindings right here, I can set that I want this. I can use a global setting here. Now the global setting means it doesn't change. Right now the current selection means whatever I have selected, the MIDI information is going to get sent to that one right there. But global means I'm going to hard code it and it stays fixed. So maybe on page, let's go to the green page on this one, and this is going to be. I'm going to keep this one as my master bank all the time. So, or my master bus. So if I go back to my session here, I'm going to go to my master buses. I only have like, yeah, I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 of these right now. But environmental corridor doesn't have a gain control on it. So I'm going to set these 4 up to be these 4 right here. And they will never change with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this first thing, and I want to change a global. I want to use a global setting. So what the global one means is like it hard codes it. It doesn't change. Same thing on the triggering. So if I want to set some of these so that this one, no matter what page I'm on the screen, this one will always be footsteps or something like that. I can change that. So I'm going to go to global, add and learn binding, and I'm going to choose bottom left for this will be SFX. And this one's a little strange. So I'm going to choose like let's do object properties. And I'm gonna do, does it do bus? No, I'm gonna do, let's try bus volume. Okay, and then over here I have to choose which one it is. Some of these you can touch. So actually, let's do this again. Let's hit learn, lower left. Actually, let's get rid of this. Can I clear this one out? Clear controller assignment. Just cut. I would say, let's just remove this one altogether. Let's do it again. So I'm going to move my lower left. And if you look over while this is going, it turns green. That means you can just touch whatever you want it to do. So in this case, I'll touch this one right here, voice volume. And this is the weird part, is that it says I want to do voice volume, but it doesn't say, it just says voice volume, but it doesn't say which voice volume. So you still have to, you have to point to the one you want it to do. So in this case, I'm going to do master mixer hierarchy, master audio bus, and I'll just select master audio bus. So now this knob is hard coded to my master audio bus, no matter what page I'm on or where I'm at or what I'm touching. So even if I select something else, this is still going to be my master control right there. Actually, I should put that on the far right, but whatever. I screwed that up. So let's just do the other couple. Well, actually, let's do the rest of these. Can I duplicate, I wonder? No, I'll probably just have to do add and learn. So I'll do this one right here to be SFX or bus volume. It's going to be bus volume on this one right here. So this is voice volume, and I want to do this one as. Actually, I'm going to reassign the other one above it. I'm going to do this correctly. So if I want to reassign this to not master, but I want this one to be SFX, okay. Then I want the next one over to be environmental. Okay. Let's do add and learn binding. That's this one. Oh, I just touch it. Oops. Learn voice volume. I want this one to be music. And the last one I want to do master. So add and learn binding. Master. Cool. Sweet. Now if I close this one out, it's my master. And now if I were to create something with, I'll probably likely in the real world, I'll have a fair amount of buses there. And on my master page here, I can just quickly go through and listen to it. So now what we can do is actually let's save the game. Let's go save my session, and let's bounce this thing out. So go to let's go Mac Windows. I guess I don't need Mac for today. And I don't need to add everything because I'm guessing they have everything already added in here. So they've already added all the events into here, just into a main one right here. And I do need to change my user settings, override generation, Windows. see, audio kinetic. Cool. Select folder. Okay. Generate selected. Cool. So now if we go play cube. All right, so we've got it playing. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back over to here, and I'm going to connect to cube. Now, what's cool is, let's see if I can get these in two different windows here. Oops. I'm gonna shrink this up a little bit. Let me get this shrunk. Come on. There we go. I'm gonna pull up my master mixer window here. So it should be synchronizing. Not seeing that, but I can play. So I can mix. So with my controller, I can mix the game while I'm playing it, which is huge. You can't see that. Sorry, your faces are in my way, so I can't see this thing. So when I'm running around, it's hard to have. I can only do gunshots right now, but if I bring so sound effects, so we know that the weapons run through the sound effects bus. So all of your controls, so you can actually be mixing the game in real time while this is actually playing. And it's hard to play it by yourself, which is annoying because like you have to have your pages. But that's why I like the idea of the hard coding of these. So I know that if I ever to set up a page that I could set up volume control for dialogue, maybe I'll have a set of these for the like main character dialogue, and then like accessory character dialogue as a separate bus or sub bus, so that I can control these things. I'm mixing while I'm playing it real time, so that you can match your footsteps to your music and make sure that everything's ducking and making sure that everything's performing as the way it should. That is huge, because before, back in the day, you had to sit there and we call it throwing it over the fence. You'd give all your sound effects to your audio programmer. They would drop it in, and the mix would be terrible. And you'd have to ask them to adjust stuff manually by 2 or 3 dB. And then also things like ducking and this complex interaction between sounds when things get built up gets really, really hard to do it. So when you can actually play the game in real time and actually mix the game while it's playing, that's freaking huge. So let's get out of this. And then what I would do is once I get the thing set, once I get it set the way I like it, then you actually just re-export once you get your mix sounding the way you like it, you just export your sound mix again, and you're good to go. And you've got a mix. And so you can refine it over time. Jordan, when you say is that note versus velocity, is that from a long time ago? Sorry, I didn't see that till now.
Yeah, that was from a while ago. I was just talking about like the MIDI note versus CC.
Yeah. So yeah. So one of them is a MIDI note, one of them is a CC value. Did I actually answer that, or is that? Oh, sorry. I say we're saying like yeah. So velocity is not a CC. So there's MIDI note and there's CC. So MIDI notes are like piano key rolls. Is actually like the note value. CC is just like it just means a control value. So it still has control. It doesn't. Control values don't have velocity, but it's like but it does. It's just a different. Every MIDI note has 3 values. It has channel, note, and velocity. But CC values, they still have velocity, but that's usually just the value. It's going to be like between 0 and 128. Yeah, it's a little more complex than that. I don't really have time to go into that right now because we got to get out of here. But
No worries. No worries. I just thought maybe that was it.
okay, yeah. All right, so I'm going to stop recording here.